Good morning to everyone. Some of you I recognize from last night. Some of you are new, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Lisa Craig. I am the principal of the Craig Group and am working very closely with our good friend Kira Rupsing from the National Trust Trinidad and Tobago. So again, thank you for joining us. I also want to congratulate you. A number of you probably were at the inauguration of President Candelou last night, so congratulations on your new leadership. It's really leadership that we look to forward issues on climate resilience. And we are fortunate today to have a number of leaders joining us, not only up here at the dais with me, but also out in the audience who are representing their own island nations and bringing cultural heritage and the value of protecting it from climate impacts to the communities. So we're honored to have with us today, for example, the leaders from the Port of Spain, the U.S. Embassy, and the Ministry of Planning in Trinidad and Tobago. Before we begin, just a few notes I'd like to share with you. Doug Parsons is with America Adapts. Doug, if you'd like, raise your hand. Okay. A number of you may be approached by Doug. Don't be afraid of him. He will have a microphone. It's okay. You know, he does a podcast and has over 100 countries that have downloaded it, and I think you'll enjoy it immensely. It's probably the leading podcast on climate adaptation in the world. He's moderating our final panel, but he has a lot to do here, runs around and talks to those who are attending and speaking. As a matter of fact, this is the second time Keeping History Above Water has had an America Adapts podcast. So I encourage you all to look for it. It will be on the Resilient Heritage TT.com, I can't say that enough, website that is hosted by the National Trust Trinidad and Tobago. I want to go ahead and now introduce some of the individuals that will be welcoming you this morning. And I'll start out with our own Dr. Cleary Larkin from the University of Florida, who is the interim director of the Historic Preservation Program with a very strong background as former program coordinator for Florida's Resilient Cities program. She previously headed up the University of Florida's Institute for Built Environment Resilience. So, Cleary.
The Honorable Penelope Beckles-Robinson, Minister of Planning and Development of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Your Excellency Candace Bond, U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Mrs. Margaret McDowell, Chairman of the National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago. Distinguished speakers and guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Cleary Larkin, and I am so pleased to see you all this morning and to welcome you to the first International Keeping History Above Water Conference. It has been such an honor to be a part of the Resilient Heritage Trinidad and Tobago research team and to partner with the National Trust and the U.S. Embassy in the Port of Spain to experience this country's diverse culture and heritage, the bounty of natural resources, and the joy, warmth, and open-heartedness of the Trinbagonian people. Working with you over the past 18 months has been such a pleasure, and because of this, I feel I'm a Trini at heart. As many of you in this audience, we work across the world on climate and heritage issues. My primary focus as an architect, preservationist, and planner is to examine the intersection of the built environment and culture. Our work here is confirming for me that our cities have the same root causes of our current challenges with increased flooding and storms. Some of the built environment causes that I see are decades of inappropriate development, using non-vernacular materials incompatible with water, short-term thinking, and quick construction with rarely a consideration for long-lasting investment and the positive impact that would bring. And this is happening worldwide. As a preservationist, I'm reminded that we are stewards of our heritage resources. As an environmentalist, I'm saddened by the devastation that we are creating for our fellow inhabitants of the earth. And as a human being, I'm encouraged by our love of home, our connection to place, and our innate need to connect, improve, and create. I'm hoping that the proactive long-term thinking of those in this room and joining us online will bring us to a better future, to save the places that define us and the natural environment that reminds us of our role in the world. I so look forward to meeting each of you this week and hearing more about the work you are doing to further this critical cause. Thank you again for your attendance.
When we began Zoom meetings 18 months, I think it was ago, Clary now, we got to meet some wonderful people with the National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago. But I have to say, one of the most charming and inspirational individuals was Margaret McDowell. Margaret, would you welcome our audience today? Thank you.
Thank you. Not many people make me blush. You just. Okay. Well, we have our ambassador, our newly minted U.S. ambassador, and we want to to welcome you, especially. And we have our minister. I don't know if you understand how many times our minister has run to our cause. We are always, and we really want to. We have our new friends, both Craig Group and University of Florida. Tremendous work, wonderful. And also, I must say, Ambassador, that the team from the embassy have been wonderful, and I want to recognize them well here today. Once again. Well, this day is long in coming. You may have known that we did apply first for this program, and we were unsuccessful. But if you know anything about Kara Roop Singh, we were undaunted, and we tried again. And partnering with the Craig Group and the University of Florida, who brought them on, we were very pleased to achieve this award, the first country in this hemisphere to do so. However, this journey really started in 2015 when, again, Kara, a young heritage professional, went to, I think it was U.S. ICMA sponsored as an intern to Newport, and for the first time was exposed to the study of sea level rise and the adaptation measures that were practiced at that time as a result of the research that they were doing. And she was convinced that we needed to take this very seriously because many of our heritage treasures are on the coast, and in most cases less than 1 meter above sea level. So those who listened yesterday would understand how concerned we are. The last 18 months have flown by, but not without some excellent work by the University of Florida and the Craig Group, both in terms of the survey side and the community engagement. And the professionals this next few days will share with you some of their wide-ranging activities in this regard. I also need to highlight the consistent support we continue to receive from Mr. we call him Marty, Morris Hilton, who was a former director, who I must tell you, was here with us a few days before the pandemic. We closed the borders. He came in to make sure that we were going to do this time. And I really want to also recognize him, and he's here today. And I really want to particularly highlight the teamwork and support of the U.S. Ambassador Fund for Cultural Preservation, and they have really helped us to navigate through the very unfamiliar waters of this grant funding. And thank you again. I am pleased to also see a representative of INDO here in the presence of Alex Bishop Hall, and he too can bring his considerable experience to bear in this discussion. I think our ministry is well placed, as the IMA, the EMA, and CDA are all sister agencies in the ministry. And they will also be beneficiaries of the work being done. And inside the ministry itself, we have people like Dr. Kumar Singh, who you'll hear a little while, and others, so that we are really in the right place. And I am very pleased for that. So on behalf of the council, and some of our council members are here, I really want to thank all of them for coming forward to give us their time and expertise. Yesterday at plenary, in answer to the last question of the evening, Jeff Goodall summed up what we all hope will be happening for the next 3 days, when he said that we as heritage conservation professionals with expertise in climate change are bringing our collective wisdom together to bring some answers to some of the questions that we have. This is what we really look forward to achieving in this first conference, Keeping Heritage Above Water, outside of the United States. And I certainly look forward to the 3 days, and I am sure you will all be here, and I recognize all the participants who will provide some of the answers to the way forward. Thank you.
Margaret mentioned the great help we had had from the U.S. Embassy because of the fact that this was an ambassador's grant from the Cultural Preservation Program. We actually were working very closely with two individuals I'd like to go ahead and call out because they were great assistants in this effort, certainly to Kira and Clary and I. Ms. Kristen Minchner, who is the Public Affairs Officer, and Ms. Gail Sebrin, who is the Cultural Affairs Assistant. Thank them very much for helping out with this effort and keeping us on track and in line as we move forward. So with that, I'd like to welcome to the podium another Californian. Yes, transplanted here to Trinidad and Tobago. Had a lovely conversation with the ambassador last night, and I am very happy and pleased to introduce U.S. Ambassador Candace Bond.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Honorable Minister Beckles-Robinson, Chairperson McDowell, Dr. Larkin, and my husband here, Steve McKeever, who's also from California, but we're actually Midwesterners. You know, we all Californians are coming from someplace else. And my embassy team. Good morning, everyone, and I'm quite happy to be here with you today. You know, I got here 3 months ago, and you can see, I guess if you will follow social media, that I've hit the ground running since I got here to Port of Spain. And Carnival was fantastic. I survived, yes. I crawled all the pan yards and threw mud and powder in Juvet. I watched the reenactment of the Camboulay riots. I saw kings and queens. I visited Mas camps. I played Mas. I visited Children's Carnival. But this is why I call Trinbagonians Party Olympians. I had no idea that this was a 6-week affair. It was wonderful. But it was a season of celebration unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. It was beautiful to see everyone experience so much communal joy. And I love seeing that joy on everyone's faces. I picked up a few dance moves for sure, but I really felt like the ambassador of joy on those days. And it was the perfect opportunity, so early in my tenure as a U.S. ambassador, to be steeped in the rich and unique culture of Trinidad and Tobago. As the ambassador, the diplomacy of culture and the preservation of heritage and culture are important to me. One of the things I most treasured in my outreach during Carnival was visiting a children's Mas camp and participating in Children's Carnival. And it's so important for our cultural institutions and traditions to continue to be preserved and passed down for future generations. This is why I'm excited to speak with you here this morning. You all are doing the work of carrying on cultural heritage, the common language of us all as human beings. It is a common language, but the rich, tangible heritage sites that you all are discussing and protecting are unique to the history of Trinidad and Tobago and tell the story of this beautiful country. Last night, I was delighted to meet key stakeholders at the reception, many of whom I see here, who are engaged in addressing important issues at the juncture of preservation of culture and climate change. And we must work together to mitigate the impact of climate change, to protect the most vulnerable people in those countries with the least resources, and to help them manage and combat climate hazards. The United States government, through the U.S. Embassy Port of Spain, funds the National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago to implement the Resilient Heritage Trinidad and Tobago project. This is a 2-year initiative that the U.S. government funds through the U.S. Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation. You will have a chance to hear from the director for the Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation Initiatives throughout the globe, Martin Perschler, later in this conference. The U.S. Department of State launched the Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation on April 3, 2001, in order to prioritize cultural heritage activities overseas and to celebrate the new millennium. In this project, right here in Trinidad and Tobago, our funding supports the National Trust in collaboration with the University of Florida Historic Preservation Program. The initiative focuses on the impact of climate change on heritage sites in downtown Port of Spain and also Nelson Island. It will serve as a model to increase climate resilience for heritage sites across Trinidad and Tobago. And this conference and workshop comprise part of the project itself, and we look forward to the solution-oriented and thought-provoking discussions that you will have during this conference. Through this grant, the U.S. Embassy Port of Spain reinforces its relationship with and commitment to the people of Trinidad and Tobago and to the future generations of Trinbagonians. The focus is on the preservation of Trinbagonian cultural heritage, which is, of course, a rich story of this beautiful, diverse mosaic of peoples and cultures. Mitigating and addressing climate change is a shared goal of ours. It is a shared goal for the people and government of the United States and the people and government of Trinidad and Tobago. And we are proud, very proud, to be your partners in this effort. In Trinidad and Tobago, climate change and the rising sea level affect everything. One can see the damage from persistent and devastating flooding, which occurs almost every time there's a torrential rainfall, especially during high tides. We need to change how we think about the infrastructural design of our cities, ports, agriculture, housing, and public buildings. And we need to consider climate change on food security and economic development. Our grant to the National Trust will provide some of the data to inform how we change our thinking on design, and I want to acknowledge the Trust collaboration with the University of Florida Historic Preservation Program and their efforts on the technological and developmental aspects of the project. Thank you all for your commitment to preserving cultural heritage. Thank you for your commitment to mitigate the effects of climate change on our shared human heritage. And thank you all, collectively, for partnering with the U.S. government to combat climate change and work towards solutions to the climate crisis. These are big issues in front of us, but seeing you all here gives me great optimism, and I'm excited about what comes out of the conference this year, so thank you for your time and attention. And I yield back to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Ambassador. Planning is a critical component of resilience. Looking at the future of our communities here in Trinidad and Tobago and around the world, we have to understand that planning must be integrated. We deal with a lot of plans in communities, everything from very large city-level plans to smaller plans for parks and recreation, for example. But they must be integrated if we're going to be successful in addressing issues of climate resilience. And they must, from the point of view of this conference, include our cultural heritage because of not only the identity it provides to our communities and our nations, but also the economic value it provides. So I'm very pleased to see in Trinidad and Tobago that we have planning and development under the very able leadership of our next welcoming speaker. From the Ministry of Planning and Development, the Honorable Penelope Beckles Robinson, MP.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa, who's principal of the CREG group. And let me, of course, especially acknowledge Your Excellency Candace Bond, Ambassador of the United States of America to Trinidad and Tobago. And so happy to see your husband here, Mr. Steve McKeever, as well as staff of the U.S. Embassy, board members, and staff of the National Trust, as well as staff of the Ministry of Planning and Development, participants of this conference, and members of the media. It's an honor for me to be here today at this auspicious start of this Keep History Above Water Trinidad and Tobago conference and workshop. These events bring together a wide cross-section of voices emanating from various countries and contexts. From experts to business people and students, all gathered here to exchange ideas and experiences based on shared realities in the face of one common and undeniable threat, climate change. This topic is one that reverberates throughout our global village as it is impacting all facets of our daily lives in every corner of the world. Over the next few days, we will be taking a closer look at climate change and more specifically how it relates to another topic of particular importance, and that is heritage. Climate resilience and heritage preservation are topics that hold great importance and relevance to our country, our population, and our capital city. Port of Spain is well known to have been the subject of a series of land reclamation projects in the 19th century, which laid the way for growth and development and which helped shape the capital into a bustling city that it is today. However, this historical fact is also a contributing factor to the city's vulnerability, and Port of Spain has not been spared from major flooding events which have affected and continue to affect thousands of lives and livelihoods. This is why it is quite fitting that this, the first ever Keeping History Above Water event to be hosted outside of the United States, should be held right here in the city of Port of Spain. Keeping History Above Water, Trinidad and Tobago falls under the umbrella of the ongoing Resilient Heritage Trinidad and Tobago project, a project launched and managed by the National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago, which aims to study the impact of climate change on the heritage sites. Launched in April 2022, this two-year initiative is a collaborative effort made possible through a grant of $190,960 from the U.S. Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation in collaboration with the University of Florida Historic Preservation Program and the CREG Group partners. So let me here take the opportunity as well to acknowledge Ms. Clary Larking, Historic Preservation Program from the University of Florida. Thank you very much. Resilient Heritage Trinidad and Tobago has undertaken the digital documentation of two highly visible and visited heritage areas prioritized by the National Trust, Nelson Island and downtown Port of Spain, more specifically the St. Vincent Jetty Lighthouse, Fort St. Andres, and the PTSC building, known to us in Trinidad and Tobago as Citygate. These sites are historically, socially, and economically important. Downtown Port of Spain is a center of activity, hosting the country's largest land and sea public transportation hubs, banking headquarters, and commercial enterprises. Nelson Island is located off the coast of the fishing village of Carenage, which amounts for a significant residential and transient human population, making the need to understand the risk of sea level rise in these areas all the more important. I assure you that within the next couple months, I will be inviting Her Excellency and her husband to visit Nelson Island. Of course, there are 5 islands, and I do hope that the Trinidadians and Tobagonians who are here, who have never visited Nelson Island, that you will visit. Resilient Heritage Trinidad and Tobago also involves engagement with stakeholders, data sharing, and knowledge transfer, and the information being gathered throughout the course of the project will ultimately feed into the creation of conservation and adaptation management plans with prioritized recommendations for the preservation and ongoing maintenance of the named heritage sites. Furthermore, the project is intended to serve as a model that can be replicated to increase climate resilience for many other heritage sites across Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean region. As Minister with overarching responsibility for both climate change and heritage preservation issues and the National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago, I am deeply grateful for the invaluable contribution of the United States government to these efforts. Through the U.S. Embassy in Port-au-Spain and its dedicated staff, the U.S. government has been a steady partner to the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in this and several other areas, and we look forward to further opportunities for mutually beneficial collaboration between our countries. Trinidad and Tobago remains committed to making progress on the climate change agenda. Our national climate change policy is being updated to incorporate the decisions taken by the Conference of Parties to the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, and we are working towards building a greater climate resilience through initiatives in agriculture, health, transport, and waste management, among other sectors. To that end, this initiative serves as a key example of government's commitment to Theme 5 of the Vision 2030 agenda, which calls for placing the environment at the center of social and economic development. In addition, this undertaking supports our continuing efforts towards achieving both Sustainable Development Goals, that is Goal 13 for climate action and Goal 11 on sustainable cities and communities. However, as a small island developing state, we are well aware that efforts to fight climate change and build resilience must be a joint effort. It is for this reason that we continue to rely on cooperation with the international community, with whom we engage through various fora to further our national implementation efforts in tackling the climate crisis. This collaboration demonstrates our unity in executing SDG 17, Partnership for the Development Goals, such as this project represents. At this juncture, I wish to acknowledge the tireless work of the National Trust in carrying out its mandate in favor of the protection, preservation, and development of our natural and built heritage resources, as well as its efforts to incorporate climate resilience into this mandate. So, Margaret, again, I want to thank you and your staff for the excellent work. The government supports fully the work of the Trust and looks forward to continued collaboration for the implementation of the resilient heritage conservation and adaptation management plans coming out of this project. In closing, I would like to wish, of course, the participants a successful conference. I know this is the first day, and we look forward, of course, to full participation within the next couple of days. So, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your presence here today and wish you a fruitful and meaningful discussions during this conference workshop. Thank you.
Madam Ambassador, Minister, thank you very much for joining us. I know your schedules are hectic, and I appreciate the fact you took time to participate in this. I think we have some very strong leaders in the cultural heritage community in Trinidad and Tobago, and we will continue to work with our partners to build on that. We're going to do a kind of quick switch here and move into our next presentation. And so I would ask that you all, once again, thank all of our welcoming speakers today, and then we'll make a shift. So thank you.